So single family housing is going to crash in 2022, and it's really important that you prepare yourself. History does not repeat itself, but it rhymes. And I'm going to show you in 3 easy steps why this is going to take place. And if you stick around at the end of the video, I've got a great quote for you I think you're really going to like. All right, so this is single family investing, why the market is going to crash in 2022. Step number 1 comes down to inflation and interest rates. Inflation and interest rates. So let's talk for a minute about inflation. Inflation obviously makes prices go up. We're seeing inflation all the way around. It really comes from the zero interest rate policy of the Fed that's really been there for quite a while. It creates more inflation. We also have 40% of the currency that exists in the US was printed in the last 18 months. This could be substantially higher, but it's at least this much. So Bronson, you're saying these are all inflationary. So why would you say that we're going to have a crash, which a crash is deflationary, right? So why would I say that? Well, first of all, let me say the disclaimer. I am not your investment advisor. This is educational in nature only. I'm not giving you specific advice on what you can do. I'm giving my opinions, and there's my disclaimer. So I have to say that. So this is all true. This is all inflationary. However, when it comes to interest rates, we see a different story. Because what happened in the 1970s, 80s, we basically had Paul Volcker when inflation got very, very high, which inflation is high. We don't know, is it 5%, is it 10%, is it 15%? We're not quite sure where it is right now. We do know back in the late 70s, early 80s, it got up to close to 20%, and he actually increased interest rates as high as necessary. So lots and lots of pain. It caused a lot of pain to be able to basically bring things under control and bring inflation under control. Now, I don't see we have anybody necessarily that is willing to go to those lengths that Paul Volcker did, right? But you know, with interest rates, what's going to happen soon, I believe in 2022, is that interest rates are going to have to start rising. And when they start rising, it doesn't even have to be they rise very much, but when they start rising, it's going to change the landscape quite a bit. And there's one reason for that. But what it's going to do is it's going to cause single family to crash. It's going to cause single family to come down. Now, the one way this does not happen, I believe, is if Powell, when he comes up for reappointment or another term in February, if Biden replaces him with someone more dovish, somebody who's going to come along and say, hey, we're going to be even more easy money than he is, and it's just not going to raise rates even if inflation gets worse and worse. So that's going to cause single family to crash. Now, it really comes down, the reason why there's a crash is it comes down to affordability. When rates start rising, people are able to afford less of a house. And these things, we think it's just things are going, and all of a sudden one little thing shifts, and all of a sudden things are shifted back another way. And so if the interest rate goes from 3% to 5%, which 5% is actually really historically low. Historical average might be more like 7% or maybe even higher. So we have we're at rates that are just so low for long-term mortgage rates. So if a mortgage rate is 3% and it goes up to 5%, that's much more per month that somebody's going to have to pay. So then people start making choices, right, in the housing market. They start saying, okay, I mean, they're not going to buy. So they're just saying there's just fewer buyers. There's the same number of sellers, but there's fewer buyers. Or people buy smaller. Instead of buying a house, they buy a townhome, they buy a condo. And then all of this leads to a reduction in demand for single family. So again, this stuff, it happens very subtly. It can happen very quickly over time, but that's basically the first thing that's going to cause it is when interest rates rise because of inflation. All right, so this is step number 2, talking about the pendulum. So I drew a beautiful pendulum right here, as you can see, and this comes from a guy named Howard Marks. If you haven't heard of Howard Marks, he's a well-known, respected, he's the guy who's the CEO of Oaktree Capital, manages billions of dollars. Warren Buffett says whenever Howard Marks speaks or writes something, he always tries to take time to listen or read whatever he's saying. So he does some amazing memos. I suggest you check out his stuff. This comes from a book called Mastering the Market Cycle, which is, I believe, what we're talking about here when it comes to single family housing prices and a single family housing crash. So basically the whole thing about the pendulum is that just in normal market cycles, things swing back and they swing forth. They kind of have this pendulum motion where they expand and they contract, they expand and they contract. And we're seeing that now where you see it with stimulus checks, you see easy credit, you see rates low, $1 trillion spending packages, and asset prices are going up. Now what Howard Marks says is the further things go one direction, the further they have to go back the other way, the equal distance. And so it just, it might take a little longer, it might go a little further, but it is going to come back. So when they're doing some of these really things where they're just keeping rates low for so long, they're doing some unprecedented things, printing so much money, it's trying to push the pendulum further and further and further to this side. But what's going to happen, right, is that pendulum is going to swing, kick back just as far and just as high the other way. Well, what does that look like? I came in like a wrecking ball. Well, that can look like higher interest rates, lower asset prices, less or no credit. And if you are able to get loans, then it's going to be at higher rates. So it's just something to think about as you look at the economy and you're looking at what's happening, is that this stuff goes, it's a pendulum. So the further things move one way, it has to go back further the other way. And this is a guy who's been studying market cycles for over 40 years, and I really think there's a lot there. So Mastering the Market Cycle, check that book out. So right now the Fed has used almost all their tools. I mean, really, what can they do besides just continue to print more money, continue to have low interest rates, and just hope for the best, right? They have no more tools than that. Really, where we're at a place now is really a place of stagflation. What that means is unemployment is going up and inflation is going up as well. And that's happening. Now we're not seeing super high unemployment numbers because a lot of people have actually left the workplace, right? So if people are leaving the workplace because they're getting stimmy checks to stay at home, as a country, we are producing less. So we have less goods and services out there, and they're printing all this more money, which really is a kind of an inflation death spiral, right? Because you have less goods, you have more money, and the answer to that is even more money, and then it just keeps creating higher and higher inflation because people are actually disincentivized to work, right? So now the only other option of things kind of calming down and them actually starting to taper eventually is hyperinflation, which nobody really wants. This just means you print into oblivion and you just print. We've seen that historically all over. We've seen that in Venezuela. We're seeing that different places in the world now. So it's something to, no one really wants this, but it is the only other option. So as the pendulum starts to swing back the other way, we're also seeing mortgages. They were given an 18-month forbearance by the government. So if it's a Fannie product, a Freddie product, any of these type of VA loans, they were given 18 months where you just don't have to pay your mortgage. About 5% of all houses that are owned are actually in forbearance. And so it was given 18 months as of March or April 2020, which brings us to September or October of 2021. So this stuff is going to start to kick up here where people are going to have to start making payments on their homes, which once people stop paying, it's hard for people to actually want to start paying, right? You've been given easy stuff, easy money. Why would you start paying? So that's the pendulum. I want to go over that. The last thing I want to talk to you about is how you can position yourself for the crash of 2022 in the single family. So the first thing you can do is really get into long-term debt. Well, what do you mean, Bronson? What does that look like? Well, I'd say even the debt on your house is not a bad investment. It's like, hold on, Bronson, I thought you just said that single family is going to crash. Shouldn't we sell everything and get out of it? Say, well, not necessarily, because if your plan is to hold long term, if you've got 30-year fixed debt at a super low interest rate and inflation is high or is starting to pick up, my friend George Gammon would say is that the asset is actually the debt. And what I mean by that is the low interest rate you have on this piece of property is actually the asset. You're paying 3% or sub 3% or just over that for the long term on what they're seeing now is inflation, even temporarily 5, 6, 6.5%, whatever those figures are, those are going to continue to rise. And so if you have long-term fixed low rate debt, it really, really is the asset. Then you can use what you would have spent to pay that down. You can basically use that to invest in other higher return type of products. So it's something that's important. You can also use it to get into more debt. Well, what do you mean? Well, I'll give you an example. I had a personal line of credit for $100,000. I got it at 2.25%. Crazy deal, I know, fixed for 10 years. I was like, I will do that all day long. If any of you want to offer me a personal line of credit at 2.25% fixed for 10 years, I will take it all day, because really the more debt you can have for the long term, as inflation expectations are planning to rise, the better. So that's what I'm doing, and then I'm using that to invest in, second thing, inflation protected assets. So I would say in general, single family is not my first choice as far as inflation protection assets, because it is volatile. It's very subject to this pendulum. More income properties such as multifamily real estate, that's our business. We do lots of multifamily deals. If you want to check out this video about how to 17x your retirement returns compared to the stock market, check that out. Also, another thing that you can do is precious metals. Precious metals have been money or been in monetary use for 5,000 years. Did a great video about precious metals you can check out up here as well. And then the last thing is really to have some cash available. So you think of 2008, 2009, 2010, there was a need for people to have cash. There wasn't a lot of financing that was available. So if you had cash, if you had money available, there were a lot of deals out there, but there wasn't a lot of cash out there to buy those deals. So having a little cash around can be a very positive thing. Now, in general, I'm not super big on single family investing. I think it really doesn't work. And I've got several reasons for that. You can check out a video I put together up here about that. But what I really want for you is for you to experience financial freedom. And if you're interested in hearing about more videos, we're going to put more videos up here that are going to let you know more about it. But I've got this great quote that I want to share with you that I think you're going to like. All right, so this quote comes from the great Ron Paul, who I got to see recently in New Orleans at the New Orleans Investment Conference. He says, "From the Great Depression to the stagflation of the 70s to the current economic crisis caused by the housing bubble, every economic downturn suffered by this country over the past century can be traced to Federal Reserve policy. The Fed has followed a consistent policy of flooding the economy with easy money, leading to a misallocation of resources and an artificial boom, followed by recession or depression when the Fed created bubble bursts." Powerful stuff. He really believes that the Federal Reserve is actually what causes a lot of these kind of booms and busts, and really causes the pendulum, is really the fault of the Federal Reserve. I'd love to know your thoughts on that, and also this other stuff. What do you think about 2022? Do you believe that single family is going to crash? And if so, why? And if not, if you think I'm crazy, please write it down in the comments. If you made it this far, consider subscribing. Look forward to seeing you on the next video.